What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors faces off against a talk show host who refuses to show basic respect? In just 38 seconds, a single dismissive comment would shatter what should have been a simple morning interview and expose the ugly truth about how some hosts treat their guests. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the Good Morning America set that morning, expecting a normal interview. He had done thousands of them before. The legendary actor, known for his incredible roles in movies that define generations, was there to talk about his latest project. He greeted the crew with his usual warmth, shook hands, and took his seat across from host George Stephanopoulos. The camera started rolling. The bright studio lights reflected off the polished desk. George began with what seemed like a standard opening question. "Samuel, thanks for being here. Let's talk about your new film." Samuel smiled, ready to dive into the conversation. "Absolutely, George. This project has been a labor of love for me and the entire team. We spent years developing." But George cut him off mid-sentence. Yeah. Before we get to that, I want to address something else. There's been some talk online about your past comments regarding diversity in Hollywood." Samuel's expression shifted slightly. His smile faded just a touch. "Okay, what specifically are you referring to?" George leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Well, you've been pretty vocal about certain issues. Some people think actors like you complain too much about these things. What do you say to that?" The studio suddenly felt colder. Samuel took a breath, maintaining his composure. "I say that speaking up about inequality isn't complaining. It's using my platform to highlight real problems that affect real people in this industry." George waved his hand dismissively. "Sure, but don't you think you've had it pretty good? I mean, you're one of the highest-grossing actors of all time. Seems like Hollywood has treated you just fine." Samuel's jaw tightened. "George, my personal success doesn't erase the systemic issues that exist. That's like saying poverty doesn't exist because some people are wealthy. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" George laughed, a condescending sound that echoed through the studio. "I'm just saying, maybe you should be more grateful for what you have instead of constantly pointing fingers." The crew members behind the cameras exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't going the way anyone expected. Samuel sat up straighter, his voice steady but firm. "Grateful? I am grateful. But gratitude and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. I can appreciate my success while still advocating for those who haven't had the same opportunities." George rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes on live television. "Here we go with the lecture. Look, Samuel, our viewers don't tune in to hear celebrities preach about social issues. They want entertainment. They want you to talk about movies and leave the serious stuff to people who actually understand policy." Samuel's eyes widened. "People who actually understand policy? George, I've been working in this industry for over 4 decades. I've experienced these issues firsthand. I've seen talented people passed over because of the color of their skin. I've watched studio executives make decisions based on outdated stereotypes. Don't tell me I don't understand." "But that's just your perspective," George interrupted again. "Maybe those people weren't as talented as you thought. Maybe the decisions were based on merit, not race. Have you considered that?" The air in the studio grew thick with tension. Samuel leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. "Are you seriously suggesting that discrimination doesn't exist in Hollywood? That every casting decision, every executive choice, has been purely merit-based?" George shrugged. "I'm suggesting that maybe you're seeing problems that aren't really there. Maybe you're playing the victim when you're actually one of the most privileged people in the industry." Samuel's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Playing the victim? George, I've never claimed to be a victim. I'm speaking up for people who don't have a voice. There's a difference." Potato, George said flippantly. "It all sounds the same to me. Honestly, I think audiences are tired of hearing actors talk about this stuff. You're entertainers. Entertain us. Leave the thinking to other people." Several crew members visibly cringed at that comment. One camera operator looked down at the floor. Samuel took a long, slow breath. "Leave the thinking to other people? Are you implying that actors can't think?" "I'm saying you're not elected officials. You're not policy experts. You play pretend for a living." George's smile was sharp, almost cruel. "And frankly, when you use your platform to push political agendas, it's tiresome." Samuel's voice dropped even lower. "Speaking about human rights isn't a political agenda, George. It's basic decency." "Well, that's your opinion," George shot back. "But a lot of people would disagree with you. A lot of people think Hollywood is too woke, too focused on checking boxes instead of making good content." Samuel shook his head slowly. Checking boxes? You mean including people who actually represent the diversity of our world? That's not checking boxes, George. That's reflecting reality. George laughed again, that same dismissive sound. Reality? Come on, Samuel. You live in a mansion. You fly private jets. You have no idea what reality is for regular people. And you do? Samuel's voice rose slightly. George, you're sitting in a multi-million-dollar studio, hosting a national television show. Don't pretend you're some everyman who understands the common person better than I do. At least I don't pretend to be some social justice warrior while living in luxury, George snapped. At least I'm not a hypocrite. The word hung in the air like poison. Hypocrite. Several people in the studio gasped quietly. Samuel stared at George for a long moment, his expression unreadable. A hypocrite, Samuel repeated slowly. You're calling me a hypocrite for using my success to advocate for others? If the shoe fits, George said with a shrug. Look, I'm just being honest here. Someone needs to say what everyone's thinking. Samuel's voice was quiet but intense. What everyone's thinking, or what you're thinking. I think I speak for a lot of viewers when I say we're tired of being lectured by people who live in a completely different world than we do, George said. You want to talk about privilege? You're the definition of it. Samuel nodded slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. You know what, George? I've done thousands of interviews in my career. I've sat across from journalists, hosts, podcasters, everyone, and I've always tried to be respectful even when I disagreed with them. But what? George challenged. You don't like being questioned? You don't like someone pushing back on your narrative? This isn't pushing back, Samuel said firmly. This is disrespect. This is you trying to belittle my experiences and dismiss legitimate concerns about inequality in this industry. George leaned forward. Or maybe it's me refusing to let you use this platform for your soapbox. This is Good Morning America, not the Samuel L. Jackson Political Hour. Political? Samuel's voice rose. Since when is talking about equal opportunity political? Everything is political these days, George said. And frankly, I think our viewers would rather hear about your new movie than listen to another rant about diversity. Samuel stood up abruptly. The sudden movement made George flinch slightly. Another rant? You invited me here, George? You asked me these questions, and now you're calling my responses rants? George remained seated, trying to maintain his composure. I'm just saying you're being a bit sensitive about all this. Sensitive? Samuel's voice was incredulous. You've spent the last 10 minutes insulting me, dismissing my experiences, and questioning my intelligence, and I'm being sensitive? I haven't insulted you, George protested. I've just been asking tough questions. That's my job. No, George. Your job is to conduct interviews with respect and professionalism. This? Samuel gestured around the studio. This is you trying to create drama by attacking your guest. This is you trying to get a viral moment at my expense. George's face flushed slightly. That's not what I'm doing at all. Don't twist this around. Twist it around? Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You called me a hypocrite on national television. You suggested I'm too stupid to understand policy. You dismissed decades of documented discrimination as me seeing problems that aren't there. And now you're accusing me of twisting things around? I think you're overreacting, George said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. Maybe you should sit back down and we can talk about this like adults. That was it. That was the moment. Samuel took a step back from his chair. Like adults? George, adults don't talk to each other the way you've been talking to me. Adults show respect. Adults listen. I have been listening, George insisted. I just don't agree with you. Disagreement is fine, Samuel said, his voice steady despite the anger clearly visible in his eyes. But disrespect? Condescension? That's something else entirely. George stood up now too, perhaps realizing he was losing control of the situation. Samuel, come on. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Sit down. Let's finish the interview. Finish the interview? Samuel repeated. George, you haven't let me talk about my film once. You haven't asked a single question about the project I came here to promote. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to bait me into an argument so you could attack me. That's not fair, George said. I was just trying to have a real conversation. A real conversation requires two people who respect each other, Samuel said. You've made it abundantly clear that you don't respect me, my work, or my right to speak about issues I care about. George threw his hands up. Fine. If you want to walk off the set like a diva, go ahead. That'll look great for you. Samuel paused, staring at George. A diva? For refusing to be disrespected? George, that says everything about you and nothing about me. Whatever helps you sleep at night, George muttered. Samuel shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. You know what the real problem is here, George? You invited me on this show. You knew who I was. You knew what I stand for. And you deliberately tried to provoke me because you thought it would make for good television. You didn't care about having a meaningful conversation. You didn't care about promoting my film. You just wanted a confrontation. That's ridiculous, George said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Samuel challenged. Because from where I'm standing, every question you've asked has been designed to attack me or diminish my credibility. You haven't shown the slightest interest in actually understanding my perspective. You've just wanted to tear me down. George crossed his arms. I think you're being paranoid. Samuel laughed again. That same humorless sound. Paranoid. There's another word to dismiss someone's legitimate concerns. You know, George, I've dealt with people like you my entire career. People who think they can talk down to me because of who I am, or what I look like, or what I believe in. And I've learned that the best response is to simply walk away. So you're running away, George said. Can't handle the heat? Samuel turned back to face him fully. I'm not running from anything. I'm choosing not to participate in whatever game you're playing here. There's a difference. The viewers will see this as you being unable to defend your positions, George said smugly. The viewers, Samuel said slowly, will see exactly what happened here. They'll see a host who invited a guest onto his show and then spent the entire time attacking him. They'll see someone who abused his position of power to try to humiliate someone else. And they'll draw their own conclusions. George's smugness faded slightly. You're making me sound like some kind of villain. I'm not making you sound like anything, Samuel replied. I'm simply describing what happened. You did this, George, not me. A producer's voice could be heard off camera. George, maybe we should take a break and... We don't need a break, George snapped, not taking his eyes off Samuel. Samuel, if you walk off this set, you're just proving my point. You can dish it out, but you can't take it. Samuel's expression was calm now, almost serene. George, I have nothing to prove to you. I came here in good faith. I was willing to have any conversation you wanted to have. But I won't sit here and be insulted. I won't be talked to like I'm stupid or like my experiences don't matter. I have too much respect for myself to do that. So that's it? George asked. You're just going to leave? Yes, Samuel said simply. That's exactly what I'm going to do. He turned toward the edge of the set. The crew members nearby stepped back, unsure of what to do. George called after him. This is unprofessional, Samuel. You're supposed to honor your commitments. Samuel stopped and looked back over his shoulder. My commitment was to do an interview, not to be a punching bag for your ego. There's a difference. My ego? George's voice rose. You're the one who can't handle being challenged. Challenged? Samuel's voice was quiet but carried across the studio. George, you haven't challenged a single thing I've said with actual facts or logic. You've just insulted me repeatedly and expected me to smile and take it. That's not a challenge. That's bullying. George's face turned red. I am not a bully. Don't you dare call me that. Then what would you call what you've been doing for the past 15 minutes? Samuel asked. Because from where I stand, you've used your position as host to attack a guest who has no real recourse. You've talked over me, dismissed my experiences, called me names, and now you're acting offended that I'm choosing to leave. What would you call that behavior? George opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since the interview started, he seemed at a loss for words. Samuel continued. You know what the saddest part of all this is? You had an opportunity here. You could have had a real conversation about important issues. You could have asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. You could have used your platform to shed light on problems that need attention. But instead, you chose to create conflict for the sake of conflict. You chose drama over substance. And that's on you, George. That's all on you. A long silence filled the studio. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the standoff. Finally, George said quietly, If you leave, you're banned from this show. Samuel actually smiled at that. George, after this experience, why would I ever want to come back? With that, he unclipped his microphone, set it carefully on his chair, and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio. Every crew member watched him go, and several of them had expressions of sympathy on their faces. George stood alone at the desk, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. Cut to commercial, he said to the crew. Cut to commercial now. But the cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, capturing the moment perfectly. The host, standing alone at his desk, watching his guest walk away with dignity intact, the empty chair where Samuel had been sitting, the microphone lying abandoned on the seat. Samuel reached the studio door and pushed it open. Just before he stepped through, he turned back one last time. His voice carried across the entire space. "You know, George, I hope you watch this back and really think about how you treated me today. Because this isn't who you have to be. You chose this. Remember that." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded deafening in the silence. George stood frozen for a moment longer. Then he sat down heavily in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Are we still rolling?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," came the reply from behind one of the cameras. George looked directly into the camera, his expression difficult to read. "Well," he said, "that just happened." A producer rushed onto the set. "George, what are we going to do? We've got 20 minutes of show left and—" "I don't know," George interrupted. "I don't know." The crew scrambled into action, people talking over each other, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the program. But the damage was done. In the span of one interview, George had revealed something ugly. He had shown viewers exactly who he could be when given power over someone else. In the hallway outside the studio, Samuel walked with his head held high. His publicist rushed to meet him, phone in hand, already fielding calls. "Samuel, are you okay? What happened in there?" Samuel took a deep breath. "I did what I had to do. Nobody talks to me like that. Nobody." "The network is going to have questions," the publicist said nervously. "Let them ask," Samuel replied calmly. "I've got nothing to hide. Everything that happened in there is on camera. People can judge for themselves." Back in the studio, George was surrounded by producers and executives, all of them talking at once. "What were you thinking?" one of them demanded. "You can't talk to guests like that." "I was just asking tough questions," George protested weakly. "Tough questions?" another executive said incredulously. "George, you called him a hypocrite. You told him he was too stupid to understand policy. You dismissed everything he said. That wasn't journalism. That was a personal attack." George's shoulders slumped. I thought it would make for compelling television." "Compelling television?" The first executive shook his head. "George, you just drove away one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. You humiliated him on national television. Do you have any idea how bad this makes us look? How bad this makes you look?" In the makeup room down the hall, crew members were already talking about what they had witnessed. "I can't believe he just kept pushing," one said. "It was like he wanted Samuel to walk out." "He was so disrespectful," another agreed. "I've worked on this show for 5 years and I've never seen George act like that." "Do you think Samuel will say anything publicly?" a third person asked. "He doesn't have to," someone replied. "Everyone saw what happened. The whole thing was on camera." Indeed, within the studio, people were already pulling up the footage on monitors, watching the confrontation unfold again. Each time they watched it, George's behavior seemed worse. The condescension, the dismissiveness, the outright insults. It was all there, captured in high definition. One of the younger producers spoke up quietly. "This is going to be everywhere by tomorrow. Social media is going to destroy us for this." The head producer nodded grimly. "I know. Start working on damage control. We need a statement ready." "What kind of statement?" someone asked. "Are we going to apologize?" "I don't know yet," the head producer said. "Let me talk to legal first." "But this is bad. This is really bad." Meanwhile, George sat alone at the anchor desk. The studio now mostly empty as people rushed around trying to figure out what to do next. He replayed the conversation in his head, and for the first time, he started to see how his words must have sounded, how his tone must have come across, how his entire demeanor had been hostile from almost the beginning. He had thought he was being provocative. He had thought he was asking the questions that other people were too afraid to ask. But watching it back now on the monitor in front of him, he could see the truth. He hadn't been provocative. He had been cruel. The makeup artist who had worked with Samuel earlier approached George hesitantly. "Mr. Stephanopoulos, are you all right?" George looked up at her, his expression weary. "Did you see it? The interview?" She nodded. "I saw some of it. What did you think?" he asked. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I think maybe you were harder on him than you needed to be." George laughed bitterly. "Harder than I needed to be. That's one way to put it." He paused. "He's not coming back, is he? Would you?" she asked gently. "If someone treated you the way you treated him?" George didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the answer. In a car now pulling away from the studio, Samuel sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the city passing by. His phone was buzzing constantly with messages and calls, but he ignored them all. He needed a moment to process what had just happened. "Do you want to talk about it?" his publicist asked from the seat beside him. Samuel shook his head. "Not yet. Right now, I just want to sit with it for a minute." "Fair enough," the publicist said. "But Samuel, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Nobody should have to sit there and take that kind of treatment." Samuel nodded slowly. "I kept waiting for him to change course. I kept thinking maybe he was just having a bad morning, or maybe he was trying some new interview technique. But it never stopped. It just kept getting worse." "He crossed so many lines," the publicist agreed. "I've never seen anything like that on a major morning show." Samuel turned to look at her. "You know what bothers me the most? It's not even the insults. It's the assumption behind them, the assumption that I don't have the right to speak about these issues. The assumption that because I'm an actor, I must not be intelligent enough to have informed opinions. That dismissiveness, that condescension, it reveals so much about how some people view not just me, but anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of who should have a voice." The publicist nodded thoughtfully. "You've always used your platform responsibly. Anyone who knows you knows that. But George doesn't know me," Samuel said. "Or maybe he does and he just doesn't care. Either way, he made assumptions about who I am and what I stand for, and he never once stopped to actually listen to what I was saying." They drove in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "I've been doing this job for over 40 years. I've faced rejection, discrimination, obstacles that would have made other people quit, but I kept going because I love what I do and because I believe in the power